Welcome to this next episode in our Emmes at Home series, a program developed by Emmes to share thought leadership safely and securely from their homes during a pandemic. We are here today with Dr. Darby Thompson, president of Emmes Canada. So you've spoken to the major benefits of using real-world data in clinical studies, and you've mentioned a number of the challenges. I'm wondering, has anything been missed? Are there other major challenges that you face in designing studies using real-world data, and are there regulatory concerns that we haven't yet addressed that provide additional challenges in setting up studies and executing them?
There are absolutely a lot of methodological challenges that if you want to cut out a huge part of the audience who might be interested in watching this, we can go talk about statistics for a while. But there's some major methodological issues with how to deal with the data and how to properly conduct inference, get p-values, get meaningful estimates out. These are open questions to deal with. I think the element that is little understood, because the agency doesn't fully understand it yet anyway. They've had two guidances on using real-world data in regulatory applications. And interestingly, they've said they've defined real-world data as anything that's not data from a clinical trial. But then they also, the theme that I've mentioned before, you need to carefully pick the conclusions that you can derive from the data. Okay, so those two we'll take. The third is that there's still a fitness test. That even though real-world data is everywhere and we can reuse it all in one way or another, they still say that 21 CFR 312, that's basically the new drug, the investigational new drug application regulations. So everything that would cover you that you're doing under an IND study, as well as the two regulations covering consent and protection of human subjects, those still apply. Even if you're collecting and using real world data, EHRs, ePros, billing data, those regulations may still apply, which means essentially that you have to basically show that you have collected the data ethically, that when necessary, you've disclosed your use of it to the individuals who are contributing it, or that there's some other mechanism to protect their confidentiality and right to privacy. So the FDA has said, well, you can access any data you want. You can make lots of different conclusions. It can impact your trial in many ways. But we may still choose to apply a data standard to anything that smells fishy, including to the point where they reserve the right to audit it.
Okay, so Dr. Thompson, are there regulatory hurdles to getting FDA, EMA, and other regulatory bodies to approve trials that use real-world data?
Yes and no. I think that the first thing is that you have to know that sponsors or other stakeholders have to know is that both the FDA and the EMA are eager to see this data. They're eager to see it incorporated. They're interested in seeing these things move as quickly as possible. It makes everybody's job easier. So, and you can tell that by the guidance documents that have come out. They are asking for sponsors and other experts to be submitting data, to be thinking about how to integrate these these sorts of data into the trial design, into the subject selection process, into the data capture processes. They can't write the regulations thoroughly because they haven't seen that many applications yet. So if you read them carefully, they literally are asking you to submit things in a thoughtful way. And that's why it's important to have expertise on your team. But some of the specific challenges that you can expect to go forward is that when you go in with a trial design that might be incorporating real world data, you have to be incorporating it in a way that your conclusions are supported by the results. And that's explicit in the real world evidence framework from the FDA. You have to specifically define objectives for real world data. You have to specifically justify why the data that you're submitting is suitable for those questions. The FDA gives you some outlines on what are specific capabilities of claims data versus EHR versus wearables versus patient-reported outcomes. Phase 3 trials, for example, patient-reported outcomes are required. Phase 3 trials, you can't take claims data as a external control, and there are some things like that that are strongly implied by the guidance and some that will be obvious when you get an expert statistical team. The other challenge is that 21 CFR 312 applies, that there are standards for data. They have to be formatted in a reasonable way. You have to have justified the quality of the data and explained why the quality is sufficient to achieve the goals. This is sort of the data fitness assessment. And the last step is that you actually are going to be subject to 21 CFR 50 and 56, that all the ethical controls and informed consent process apply as necessary per those guidances. You may have to monitor that data. The FDA it opens the door by saying that these regulations apply. The FDA can audit the source of your real world data. They can come in and look at the process for collecting it and look at source data.
Are there any limitations or restrictions on the types of real world data you can pull from other trials and apply to the clinical trial that you're working on?
Well, that's a really interesting question. There aren't restrictions. There are really no restrictions per se on where you can get real world data from. What the FDA and statisticians recognize is that there are limits on the conclusions you can derive from the data depending on where it's collected. I have a favorite quote from an excellent statistician named Andrew Gelman. And he says, the most important aspect of statistical analysis isn't what you do with the data, it's what data you use. And that really cuts to the core of this issue. There's data everywhere now. It's the data you use to support a conclusion doesn't always match. And that's where you need the attention of statisticians rather than necessarily data scientists or really smart programmers, really smart machine learning or AI folks. They dealing with the data, creating models for the data. The statisticians and the folks at Emmes that do what we do, we deal with generalization. We deal with understanding bias, understanding inference. And that's where we get to understand how the data that we're accumulating, what questions can we really answer? So like ePro data serves its purpose. We understand the experience of the patient. Electronic medical record data serves its purpose. We can get an idea of what's going on in the population, but to use it straight up, we don't understand the treatment decisions that were made to give particular treatment courses to particular patients. And we have to understand the influence of that bias in order to use the data properly. So there's no limit. Real world data can come from anywhere, but what we can do with it is constrained by the nature of its collection.
You know, something you mentioned about the value of the data you choose as well as the tools you use to analyze it. It makes me wonder, is there a shelf life to the data that you use, that you're incorporating it into a trial, you're making certain conclusions based on that, but the real world is in a constant state of dynamic change. So how long does the data stay valid?
Absolutely, and there is a lifetime to data, and in fact, the FDA. So part of what I'm referring to when I say the FDA is as part of the 21st Century Cures Act. A mission of the FDA was to determine how real-world data can be incorporated to help change indications, change dosing, or accelerate the product approval process. So in the initial guidances that are coming out from the FDA, they address this. And they basically say that, similar to how I said, there's a huge supply of real-world data. You can use all of it, but you can't use all of it for everything. And one of the things they say is if you're looking at something like, say, a contemporaneous control group or external comparator group or even a population selection tool, it must be as close to contemporaneous as possible. Or you have to be able to analyze that data sufficiently to show that it's comparable to the population that you want going forward. And depending on the disease area you're in, I mean, think of like Crohn's disease, for example. If you take Crohn's disease from 10 years ago, it's the real world data you might have collected from EHRs or even ePros from 10 years ago is not going to look anything like it does in the last few years with the new immunomodulatory treatments that have come out, the biologics that have come out to treat this and many other autoimmune conditions. That old real world data is kind of useless other than maybe phenotyping people, but even that is very different if you have people following their regimen. And we've done some of this work. You can look through the real world data to see changes in the patient management course. And so you can see that more recent data, patients are very different even than they were 5 or 10 years ago. It depends on the field. Cancer is going to be very different. But if you even look at breast cancer before they identified the HER2, you're going to see treatment differences and survival very differently then than now. So it's very context dependent, and you can use bits and pieces of it, but you have to acknowledge, again, the generalizability. The data you're selecting might not apply to the future going forward, or at least if you think it does, you're going to have to justify how.
Thank you again for attending, and have a great day.